Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. That is the most awesome welcome at any conference ever. Actually, suggested to a couple of conference organizers they should do the same, but nothing is better for, and more scary, for speakers than showing up with this. So thank you so much. James, welcome. So that guy, typically, we have, 10, 15 minutes to chill, have a coffee. He arrived 30 seconds ago. There was a big accident. So we're going to get going and get right into it.
I think the last time I was here, I literally came at the last minute.
That's
as well,
true.
so
4 years ago, I was waiting for you, same thing, and I was sort of preparing my jokes. And you know what? Just in case you were late, I have some numbers about FitBit. So I was fortunate enough to be involved in FitBit in the early days. And it's always sort of interesting for investors 10 years later to see how much progress they've made. So a few numbers for you guys. 70 million devices out there in the field. $6.1 billion in revenue until Q3 of 2017. Not too shabby. 50,000 stores, 6 billion nights of sleep tracked, 75 countries, 25 million active users and change, and 95 trillion steps counted. 95 trillion. That's so big that you can't even fathom what that means.
Yeah, I think at some point we internally had this, vanity stats, like what's the distance that Fitbit users have walked from Earth to like the moon, to Mars, Jupiter, and I think we might be at Pluto. If Pluto is still a planet, I think that's still a point of debate. So
that still counts.
Somewhere out there,
trillion.
Outer edges of the solar system.
And I still try to do my 125,000 steps.
You're helping. You're helping.
So
I'm
helping.
Global cause.
So we were here 4 years ago. We talked about the history of Fitbit. That was an adolescent. We went public in the meantime, and so now we're sort of a young adult. Can you give us sort of a bit of perspective on where Fitbit is now?
Young adult. Wow, I feel like we're like
well,
very aged at this point.
You've been at this for 11 years.
11 years, yeah. So it was 30 when I started. I think the thing that struck me the most is just it's been 11 years, and almost every year, except maybe a chunk a few years at the very beginning, what I've been doing at the company and my job and my roles and responsibility has changed. And so every year I still ask myself, hey, is this what I want to be doing? Am I still excited to come into work every day, even though what I'm doing is different? And the answer is always yes, and hope to continue that.
It's amazing to see sort of a founder, who showed up in my office with that sort of ugly piece of plastic prototype, still convinced me to invest.
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Has become, sort of a public company CEO. This is very impressive. So Fitbit has sort of started morphing towards more of a healthcare company. You want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so in the intro, there's a hint at the inspiration for Fitbit originally, and it came from the Nintendo Wii. We were just really fascinated by the way that Nintendo had combined sensors and really amazing software and made gaming into something that was very active and fun and positive. And I still had a lot of time to play video games back then. So I remember they announced, and I waited at Best Buy for like 3 or 4 hours at 6 a.m. Finally got the console, and I was just really captivated by the system and where technology had come. And so that was the start of the company. And so for the first, I'd say good chunk of the company's history, we were really focused on the consumer. Although we were selling devices to corporations as part of their employer and employee wellness programs. But it's been in the past few years that in talks in conjunction with industry, we've realized that there's a lot of impact that we can have beyond the consumer. And there's a lot of impact that we can have by integrating more deeply with the healthcare ecosystem, whether it's with employers, with payers who are insurance companies, providers like hospital systems, and researchers as well. So we've started building a pretty good business on that front in the past few years.
That was actually one of my questions, which is, so we have all this treasure trove of data. So we both wear the Ionic, right, which is an awesome device, which captures, heart rate, the sleep pattern, steps, activity, and so on and so forth. But it's sort of stuck in the Fitbit app. So how can we get that flowing in the ecosystem so my doctors can actually sort of benefit from all that activity information?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One, we're actually starting pretty serious and meaningful data integrations with a lot of different companies in the healthcare ecosystem today. So last year, we announced a partnership with United Healthcare for a program called Motion, where United, they're the largest health plan in the US, they actually did the actuarial research to figure out what are the different types of physical activity goals that lead to reduced cost savings. And we did a data share agreement and resulted in a program where people can get rewarded or compensated up to $1,500 a year for hitting certain activity goals. So that was one of the big outcomes of data sharing. And then recently we announced a partnership with United and Dexcom, where we're starting to merge data streams from continuous glucose monitors and activity trackers to reduce the amount of insulin that people take and reduce healthcare costs. So that was a big thing. And then this morning we just announced acquisition of a company called Twine Health, which comes out of a lot of research from the MIT Media Lab, where they're using data and AI to really impact in a positive way health outcomes like diabetes. And part of the Twine platform is actually a data integration layer where they're taking in data from hospital systems and other devices beyond just the Fitbit. So I think we're starting to really see the impact of what data integration, data sharing can mean for a patient or employee or just the consumer as well.
And is that integration going to happen with, sort of systems the data systems of the hospitals, or is that something that consumers will actually have access to, so that we can have sort of a holistic view of our data and potentially some insights?
Yeah, it's going to be both. So Twine's done a lot of work in integrating with different data providers out there, and there's going to be some global unified view that's provided to the consumer or to the patient, because having that integrated view is actually really powerful in terms of getting insights and correlations that can guide people to whatever health goal that they're trying to achieve.
So in the early days, the Fitbit sort of value prop was, let's track your activity, and we had those activity trackers. Actually sort of got one. So here is the Fitbit One, right? So this is what we sold, and then we switched to wrist-based trackers, and then we switched to smartwatches. So it has, and that's over a 8-10 year sort of period. What does that mean, and where does that go?
Yeah, so I think what it really demonstrates is, I think over the years people have tried to characterize or even pigeonhole Fitbit as a X company. So originally we were, people called us a connected pedometer or tracker company, and then we evolved to different form factor on the wrist, and as you said, now we're evolving to smartwatches. So we've actually evolved the business from a technological and product point of view 3 times over the company's history. And I think what it really goes to demonstrate is Fitbit is not just about one particular thing. We're really about driving health outcomes for people. And that can mean different types of devices. And more importantly, there's a huge software and data story that's going to play out over the next few years. And we're trying to evolve that way as well.
Not mentioning all the connected aspect for the weight, because
we have different products. We have a connected weight scale, which has been doing really well. I think we're probably the 1 or 2 biggest scale manufacturer in the world, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Apple and us are probably, I think Apple just announced that where they're the biggest watch vendor.
Million devices.
Yeah, and we're probably getting up there as well. And for us, that's been in a matter of year. We've vaulted into the leading ranks of watch manufacturers in the world, Upstage and Casio, Seiko, all those players. So I think it also goes to show that, this is a pretty dynamic industry, and tech can come in and disrupt a lot of things in a very rapid way.
So try and paint a picture for us of the future of this category. Where does that go? We're back at third grind in, let's say 2023. What do we talk about?
Yeah, so I think where Fitbit is going is really about integrating more deeply with the healthcare ecosystem and becoming a bigger player in healthcare. And I think that's the evolution of a lot of technology categories where people might initially view a product as, a toy or a luxury item, and then it becomes something that's mission critical or something that people can't live without. So from my point of view, a great outcome for Fitbit would be, just like in cars where you wouldn't get into a car today without a seatbelt or an airbag, or even in the future, some type of AI system that helps with safety. There should be a point where you wouldn't want to leave your house without a Fitbit just because of the negative impacts that it could have for your health. You'd be kind of concerned or scared to leave home without it. That's a fear-based thing, but also there's a lot of positive outcomes that you should get from wearing a Fitbit as well. And so, my hope is that what we're doing is considered life critical or mission critical in the future.
I think one of the features that I really sort of like with the Ionic is sort of this really interesting sleep tracking and benchmark and sort of the ranges, whether you're in REM, whether in deep, in light. That's actually something that I watch pretty much every day just to see how well I slept. And I see a correlation when I don't have my deep sleep, percentage. I'm not as in good shape.
Yeah, I mean, and that points to a lot of what technological evolution and sensors in this category are pointing to, not just sleep, but heart rate as well. And I think we've done additional clinical research that shows that our device can detect more serious conditions like sleep apnea, arrhythmias, et cetera. So that lends itself to a future where these devices are going to be, a critical part of people's lives.
So let's switch gears. That was sort of an update on Fitbit and where the category goes. I'd like to sort of go to the entrepreneur story. So we've been at this for 11 years. This is a journey we've done together for about 10 years. Just give us a sense of what has changed, for hardware entrepreneurs, for entrepreneurs in the ecosystem. You were one of the, very successful hardware stories. Unfortunately, there's only like 2 or 3, and there's a lot of pain. Any hardware entrepreneurs here? Trying to build hardware? Okay.
Good luck.
Hardware is hard. Good luck. So for those poor, I mean, not poor.
Not
for those
poor. Courageous.
Courageous
Yes.
folks. What was it looking like 10 years ago? What's there now for them to make their life easier?
Yeah, so when we started 11 years ago, there was really no infrastructure for hardware startups. I think it was really a black box and a lot of just knowledge that was handed between people, amongst people, et cetera. So you really had to know some of the key people in the industry, and even some of the basic things like how do you market, how do you advertise. Like there was nothing like Kickstarter or Indiegogo back then. So I remember just basic e-commerce infrastructure. We were trying to do pre-orders like Kickstarters today, and no one had done it before. So there wasn't a model for us to follow. It's like, how do you do hardware pre-orders? Like, how do you keep people happy when your product is inevitably late? Like every project. I think we were about a year or 2 late.
There's a funny story here. So, we do the pre-orders just before TechCrunch 40. They get on stage and so on and so forth. It's, shipping for Christmas. Awesome. Very excited. Get 3,000 pre-orders?
Yeah, a few thousand pre-orders.
3,000 pre-orders.
That day, yeah.
And, lo and behold, ship for Christmas the following year.
And we didn't say the year, so that was
smart, right? Announce the month, not the year. And then by then, sort of James had just run out of, I wouldn't say excuses, because you were very transparent and always sort of explained the reasons for the delays and everything. And it was so hard, right?
Yeah, I mean, we set up a blog, we had a Flickr photo stream, we were trying to keep people entertained and distracted. And, whenever I see Kickstarter projects today that do the same thing, it's nostalgic and painful at the same time.
So what's really key? What's the difference between the haves and the have-nots in the hardware category? Like, what are the key things that you need to do from the get-go, think about and plan from the get-go to make sure that you have this massive sort of scale, 70 million devices?
Yeah, I think one is, make sure it sounds kind of simple, but make sure you're creating and building something that people really, really want. And I think Kickstarter is a great way to test that kind of concept. For us, I think literally the first day we generated $2 or $3 million in pre-orders, and that was 11 years ago. So I would say, hey, look, if your project's not getting that initial level of excitement, there's probably some tweaking or tuning that you have to do. There's a lot of great feedback that we got from investors as well, some that we took, a lot that we didn't. So you kind of have to balance and use your judgment. I think talking very early on to potential channel customers like Best Buy, et cetera, can be very valuable. Again, you have to use your judgment as to what advice you take or not, but they're also very attuned to the desires of the retail customer and the trends. So there's a lot of inputs that you should be taking. And another aspect too is, I'm not sure that you should raise a ton of capital either. I think there's a lot of companies out there that probably raise too much capital, and especially in hardware, I think it distracts you from being very operationally efficient in the early days, which can be very deadly later on.
Just to put things in perspective, so over the history of Fitbit, before the IPO, we raised a total of 63 million,
yeah.
right? And a lot of that was the last round, which was 30
40, I think 40
million.
Yeah.
And Fitbit went public only consuming about $30 million, which is incredible for a hardware company, because James really sort of focused on building, a profitable business with good margins. And unfortunately, that's a discipline that a lot of people have kind of lost, because they can essentially go to, somewhere on Sand Hill or somewhere in San Francisco and just get, $50 or $100 million. And so we see those massive, massive rounds, especially now with the, SoftBank Vision Fund that can write you, $300 million check. It's sort of bigger than an IPO for most. So any thoughts of the, pros and cons or dangers? And
Yeah, I mean, we have a classic example in our category of a competitor that raised almost $1 billion and, didn't have
that hurts.
Yeah, that's definitely painful. So if I look back, I would say it was very difficult to run the business on the amount of capital that we raised, but I think it really forged our DNA to be incredibly efficient. Every product that we launched were highly disciplined on the gross margin of the product, and not just gross margin, thinking about selling direct to consumer, but also baking in the fact that what happens when there's a retail partner involved and they want their cut. So typically we'd have to look at, hey, our costs, multiply that by 4 or 5x, and that would result in the MSRP, and then we'd have to figure out, hey, is this the MSRP that consumers would actually pay for and what volumes, et cetera. We never banked on the fact that we could survive by raising another round of capital. And we're always focused on, how could we get quickest to a point where we're operating under our own steam and independent of the need for capital in the capital market. So, and I think that served us pretty well. Mm-hmm. I think when we went public, we're generating, over $300 million of EBITDA. So it was a good rocket ship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One thing I was really impressed by is how strong the early team that you built around surrounding you, whether it was Woody, Hans, and so like those key hires. Did you how did you choose them? How did you choose you? Because they were sort of critical to get Fitbit to the next level, in terms of business, in terms of manufacturing. How do those entrepreneurs sort of make that choice?
Yeah, I think we're quite fortunate to build a great leadership team in the first 2 or 3 years of the company, who were actually, managed to grow and scale with the company for a very long time. And I'm not sure if, to be honest, I thought exactly, hey, is everyone going to be around in 10 years? Because we're still fighting for literally day-to-day survival. But, in our judgment, we brought on people who were experts in their particular function, whether it was operations, manufacturing, engineering, or business, but who also had the ability to work literally hands-on. So if I had to say that there was a characteristic of the early Fitbit management team, it was people with deep industry experience, but also had a good amount of small company experience and were comfortable just doing things themselves and didn't have to hire huge teams to be actually useful, but also had that management experience as well. So those are the types of people that we looked for in the early days, and I think it served us pretty well.
Is there like one function that you would regard as the most critical in the, like when you moved from seed to Series A? Is it sort of marketing? Is it manufacturing? Like what's the key hire that these people have to think about?
Yeah, and I think some of it depends on the strengths of the original team and the founders. Early on, Eric, my co-founder, and I could do enough to get manufacturing up and running. We lived for several months in Singapore and Indonesia, trying to get our production
on the factory
lines.
floor.
Yeah, literally, Elon Musk style. And so I think we knew enough to get the company from in a manufacturing perspective to a certain point. I think that was about 50,000 units a year. And actually, one of our earlier things was, hey, we knew we wanted to get into retail and sales. That wasn't necessarily my strength or Eric's strength. So Woody, who was our chief revenue officer, was our first hire in that respect. And then we realized quickly that, hey, look, to get to 500,000 units, 1 million units a year, Eric and I weren't going to get the company there. So that's when we looked for Hans, who ran operations and engineering.
And his ability to sort of look at a BOM, talk to manufacturers, and point to you where you can save and where you have to change, processes or whatever, is still sort of amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
he's still good at his game.
The ability to select the right manufacturer, just wring out the best deal from them, manage the costs, keep quality high. There's a lot of moving pieces in an early stage company that's focused on delivering hardware. And you necessarily don't have the best leverage with the manufacturer because your volumes quite aren't there. So it does take a unique skill to be able to pull that off. I mean, it's easy when you're a big company and you're doing 20 million units a year. You can just walk into any tier 1 manufacturer and they'll be willing to hear you out and work with you. It's another thing when you're only doing 50 or 100,000 units a year.
Cool. Well, we're out of time, so we're going to wish you a great day at Startup Grind. We're going to head to the Q&A sort of session if you want to have a bit of a conversation with us. And so enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.